Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this virtual author event brought to you by Plow Publishing and Magers and Quinn Booksellers. My name is Annie. I'm the events coordinator at Magers and Quinn in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're an independent bookstore. If you're not familiar with this, is my cat, sorry. We're an independent bookstore in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're not familiar with us, welcome. Or if you've gone to one of our events before, thank you for being here. We're very pleased to be doing another event with author Rachel Pieh Jones. We have done work with her on her previous book, and we are celebrating the release of her new book, Pillars. And you can purchase that book at magersandquinn.com. There will be a link directly to that on our website in the chat. So look out for that. That will be there in a moment. Speaking of the chat, that is also where you should ask questions. So later in the broadcast, we will be taking questions and we'll be speaking with Rachel and Barbara Brown-Taylor, and we'd love to hear what you have to ask of them. So we'll get to as many as we can, and you could ask them at any point throughout the broadcast. We'll go through them at the end. So with all of that taken care of, I would just love to introduce our speakers. So first, I would like to bring to the screen the author, Rachel Pieh Jones. She's the author of Pillars and Stronger Than Death. She has written for the New York Times, Christian Science Monitor, Huffington Post, Runner's World, and Christianity Today. In 2003, she moved to Somaliland, and since 2004, she's lived in neighboring Djibouti, where she and her husband run a school. Pillars is her latest book. Rachel, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Annie. It's really great to be here with everybody tonight. I'm really thankful that everyone came out. It is 3 o'clock in the morning for me in Djibouti, but it is totally worth it to be here with you and with Barbara and Abdi and everybody watching. I'm really excited to share about Pillars. It's really the book of my heart. And I would love to just talk a little bit about the book and why I wrote it and the stories behind it. So I'm going to go way back to Minnesota and the Sunday after 9/11, when a man cornered me at church and he started reading this mass email, you know, the kind with capital bold letters and exclamation points and all kinds of violent verses from the Quran. And he seemed really scared. And then more recently, I was in southern Minnesota, and a man leaned over my shoulder and he said, "Aren't you afraid all those Muslims over there want to kill you?" And I feel like we, and by we, I mean American Christians, we have been told for a long time that Muslims are our enemy and that we need to be afraid. But like you said in the intro, I have lived in the Horn of Africa with Somali Muslims for over 18 years. And no, I am not afraid that the midwife delivering my baby wants to kill me, or that the teacher who taught my 4th grader origami wants to kill me. And also, Muslims aren't over there for me. They're right here. They're all around me. They are my coworkers and my running partners. And this morning, Muslims were the people trying to fix my internet so that I could be on with you tonight. It didn't work, so I'm at my school office instead. But no, I'm not afraid that these friends want to kill me. And not only that, but I have developed a more robust faith and a bigger worldview because of them. So how can a Christian say that her faith has grown stronger thanks to Muslims? And that is the story of Pillars. It's the story of moving away from fear, of refusing to draw enemy lines, and of discovering mutual spiritual blessing. So I felt compelled to write this story because I'm tired of being told to be afraid. I'm tired of the narrative about Somalis that only sees them through the lens of violence or famine or piracy. I'm tired of the story that Christians tell about Muslims that refuses to see an authentic spiritual endeavor in their faith. And I'm tired of the Christian story that insists on kind of a triumphal narrative in which we have nothing to learn and which makes us, or me, the savior and the hero in some way. So Pillars tells a different story of faith and friendships that connect rather than collide. And when we moved to the Horn of Africa, everything flipped upside down for me. I became the outsider, the one with the strange accent and the unusual spiritual beliefs, the one who was hard to welcome for people. But people welcomed me. So I remember one of the first welcomes I experienced. We landed at the airport in Hargeisa, Somaliland, 2003. I was totally exhausted and overwhelmed. My 2.5-year-old twins were running all around. I kept dropping my carry-on luggage. The scarf that I tried to put over my head kept falling off. And we went to the immigration desk, and this woman, she smiled. She looked at me in my kind of frazzled state, and she smiled and reached across and just tucked the corner of my scarf in to keep it from falling. And it was such a small gesture, but it was done with this tender compassion. And I look back and I think of that as a holy welcome. And I needed those holy welcomes everywhere that I could find them in Somaliland. You know, moving there was a huge blow to my pride because I knew everything before we went there. I knew how to take care of my family and how to live and how to practice my faith. But all of a sudden, I was this Minnesota girl dropped into a rural Somali village, and I was a little bit ridiculous. I couldn't walk on the road without rolling my ankles. I kept catching my skirt on cactuses. One time I was trying to deliver a watermelon to a neighbor lady who had just had a baby. And I was thinking I'm all generous and thoughtful. And my guard had to come chasing after me and kind of gently ushered me back home because I had been walking straight toward a gunfight and I had no idea. So I was just a baby in terms of survival in many ways. And then also in terms of my faith. My faith really made no sense to people here. I had one friend tell me that the way that I fasted was sinful. Another friend told me the way I disposed of my fingernail clippings opened me up to being cursed. And so from the way that I practiced Christian faith to just these simple daily practices, they were not only confusing to my friends, but they were actively working against me, you know, opening me up to curse or sin. And it was confusing for me to have this idea flipped upside down. So I made spirituality into a competition in a way, comparing my giving as a Christian to Muslim giving or my fasting to their fasting. I wanted to prove that I wasn't an infidel, which was how they defined me, as an infidel because I wasn't a Muslim. But this didn't work very well, the competition, because for example, Ramadan, the Muslim fast, was way harder than I imagined. And when I decided to try it, so no water and no food from sunrise until sunset, I totally failed. I started cheating with water, and then not only I was cheating, but I hid it from people, so I was being deceptive about it. And then I eased up on the strict sunrise or sunset timing, and then I pretty soon abandoned it altogether. And part of my struggle was I was doing it alone. So here I was a Christian trying to join into a Muslim practice to identify with the people around me, but it wasn't mine. I didn't have the special meals. I didn't have family traditions. There was no global community around me, and I didn't have the same spiritual convictions about it. So I took a step back and I thought, what is there in Christianity? What is there in my faith tradition that can give me something similar, a global sense of community? And we have Lent. I didn't know about Lent because I grew up in a Baptist tradition that didn't practice it, but I think of this as a holy welcome, another kind of holy welcome where Muslim spiritual practice opened my eyes to things in my own Christian tradition, like Lent, like prostration and prayer, or ideas about pilgrimage that I could learn from and grow in my own faith. So instead of feeling threatened by difference, and instead of feeling like I needed to adopt Muslim practices, I've gone back to my Christian spiritual heritage, and I've dug deeper into the Bible with questions like, what is prayer? How do I explain the Trinity to people who have never heard of it? What does fear mean about my faith? Why do I love Jesus? What do I believe about God's character? And then I started writing these stories down, the stories that I was experiencing with my friends and how I was processing them through my own faith to make sense of these questions. And I wanted to write a book that would bring Christians and Muslims together, that could spur dialogue between us. So I'm not telling these stories as an academic or a theologian, but as a friend and as a neighbor. I wanted to write a book that I could hand to a Christian or a Muslim or a person with no faith as a holy welcome, a book that models how I try to live transparently, following Jesus and being willing to learn at the same time. When Abdi agreed to write the foreword, and I told him this already, but when he agreed to write it, I cried because it meant so much to me that now, every time I look at the cover of Pillars and I see my name and his name there, I feel like that's it. That's what I'm trying to model. You know, a white Christian American woman living in Djibouti, processing faith, and a Black Somali Muslim American man living in the United States, partnering together to make something beautiful and good. And it gives me hope that we can move beyond fear and enemy language. So Pillars is the story of these holy welcomes that I've received from Muslims and that I'm offering to people in return. And what I hope that readers will take away from the book is that our differences don't need to divide us, but that a grounded faith should make us brave to reach across the religious differences, borders, political aisles even. I was recently at a peace building interfaith gathering a few years ago, actually, and a Somali woman sat next to me. When she heard that I lived in Djibouti, she said, "Oh, my nephew just moved to Djibouti. He doesn't speak any French, and so at school they put him next to a girl who spoke English, who could translate for him." And I said, "Oh, is your nephew's name Najib?" And she said, "Yeah, that's him." And I said, "He's sitting right next to my daughter." And so we laughed about this together, this small world, and then the call to prayer sounded. And my new friend, she grabbed my hand and she said, "Come pray with me." And I said, I wasn't sure, like, is this going to be okay with people? Are people going to be comfortable with a Christian and a Muslim praying together? And she said, "Look, I know you're not a Muslim. I know you're not becoming a Muslim, but you love God, right? Let's go pray together." And so this is a holy welcome. And Pillars is my offer of holy welcome to Christians and Muslims and anyone else. Come into the sacred space of my story. Let's seek God together and then go out and offer that holy welcome to somebody else. So that's the story.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rachel. As Rachel mentioned, there's a foreword written to Pillars by Abdi Iftin, and we're very pleased that he is joining us as well. In this broadcast. Abdi Iftin currently lives in Portland, Maine, where he works as an interpreter for Somalis who have immigrated to the state. Abdi was accepted to University of Southern Maine, where he'll be studying political science, and he's the author of the memoir Call Me American. Abdi, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Annie, thank you. Maybe we should update that bio. I'm in Boston College these days.
Oh.
Hey, Rachel, very good to see you, my friend. What an opportunity. I would like to say a few things, but I think Rachel has really touched a few amazing points. Reading your book, Rachel, mostly the narrative, as we know, coming from East Africa, written by people who are not Somali speaking, it's usually documenting the horrors, the things that they have experienced. And these are mostly journalists or diplomats or ambassadors, who have visited Somalia. So such a story, a story of American family who have moved that part of the world, lived in Somaliland and now live in Djibouti, has, it really was an honor to get to know you and know your family. Again, I grew up in Mogadishu, predominantly Muslim, very homogenous, and the idea of Christianity, of the stories of Christians, has mostly come to me through the narrative of, because you don't know, you don't live with them. So, it's mostly sort of like collecting stories that we were told at the madrasa. It could be that the person is not really pretty well educated, or maybe has his own views of how the world works. So it has always been quite conflicting for myself until I've really been able to become friends with them, as much as you have done exactly the same. Again, to come together from completely different backgrounds and to have both stories humanized, I think that's one thing I really enjoyed reading about your book. It's not about the pirates of Somalia as Hollywood has done it, or it's not about the warlords as the United States Marines stories, has dominated. So you really tackled it very well. The narrative that's out there, the dominant narrative was quite misrepresented, I think, in the stories of the Somalis. But what you have done, which is bring together this friendship, kindness, stories of people from not only from different backgrounds, but like different cultures, different language coming together to share food. And by the way, when you said Ramadan that you cheated, we do. I know Ramadan is starting in 3 days now, and I'm not really looking forward to fasting 18 hours in here in Eastern America. So I'll probably be cheating. I know my mom hopefully will not hear this. But I did not cheat in Somalia. It's just the hours are really short, and it's always been amazing, and those are really things that I miss so much. So I'm a little bit jealous that you really live there now, because Ramadan is absolutely beautiful. With the sunset, people moving up and down, buying cubes of ice, going to their houses. The smell that's coming from the kitchen is just mind blowing, right? I mean, that does not exist here, unfortunately, and it's really been quite a not eventful Ramadans, I would say, for the last 6 years. And I was really hoping to start traveling back now that I'm a U.S. citizen, to be able to spend Ramadans with friends up there. But Rachel, I think it's a page turner. It's a story that anybody can engage. It's not necessarily that you have to be interested in religion or any other thing, but it's just like the human connection of these stories that you present, right? Getting to know. I mean, I was with you on the journey, and the decision that you and your husband had to make is like, we're really moving into this part of the world, and you're Googling, all these images are coming up. It's like, whoa, are we really sure we want to do this, right? That was really, really touching, because as I read it, and in the years that you guys are talking about this, I'm the one who lives in that, working his way to get out, right? And then a few years later to come together, living into the same world, but like sort of like switched places. And that you gave me the opportunity to write a forward for you. I mean, I don't know any other thing that would really make me as excited. Then, again, there are other stories that are really captivating as you go through your stories as well. Somaliland, which is a place that I've only visited once my whole life. And, and you talked a little bit about like the clan lines, like how things are decided in Somalia, how Somaliland is more like, we're not interested in South because of the 1980s, bombardment from their president. But that Mogadishu is not really that far. I mean, we drive 8-9 hours a day here in the US, or sometimes, days and days. So reading your book, it really gave me a sense of feeling of optimism, to say, I really want to live in Somalia, where these stories sort of become the ones we teach at school. But then again, where I can drive from Hargeisa, go through Puntland, down to Southern, and get to Mogadishu. Travel with people from different backgrounds, to talk about it in a way to say, whoa, the past, it's just been quite a history. So if you want to know what it means to have to experience Somalism, or being a Somali by a foreigner, I mean, you would be a perfect example. For example, with the exposure that you had, moving into your first house, and someone shows up, like, I'm the cleaning lady, I'm fixed. I can show you how Angela is made. Here's the Somali tea, and then that's where it starts. It really, I think that's what we need, because mostly the narrative is one way. You just have this huge influx of refugees moving towards refugee camps and waiting for their way to come to the United States. That's the dominant narrative everywhere you go. And for those of us who write about I wrote my memoir based on that narrative because unfortunately it's just one way, just one direction. So now I think we need the other side, which is exactly what you have done, to ride from that side to this side, from A to B, which is, how does an American feel about Somalia? What are things that really makes you understand this nation, this society as a whole? What is your experience? What does having a friend in Djibouti or in Somalia really mean? You know, there's one word that that you have used, which is really interesting, which is infidel, right? I use that word quite a lot, but nowadays, based on the definition of how you really see it, it becomes completely something else. I think what is really striking mostly is that this is a story that humanizes the Somalis, not criminalizes the Somalis, and that's very critical. That's really, really critical. I'm saying Somali is not based on the map, but like Djiboutians speak Somali and French as well. So when I say Somali, we're including anybody in that part of Horn of Africa, Eastern a little bit, that actually speaks Somali, including even the Dam and parts of Ethiopia. It's like all scattered all over the place. So Rachel, like I said, I'm really, really very happy to join you and to be part of this discussion. I apologize if I was speaking forever.
Thank you so much, Abdi. We are going to bring our final guest here to the screen. We are very pleased to have with us tonight Barbara Brown Taylor, the New York Times bestselling author of An Altar in the World, Learning to Walk in the Dark, and Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others. She taught world religions at Piedmont College in rural Northeast Georgia for 20 years before putting the chalk down in 2017. Now she and her husband Ed tend a small farm in the foothills of the Appalachians, which sounds fantastic. Barbara, thank you so much for being here.
I can't tell you how honored I am. I feel like I'm at the Academy Awards because Abdi and Rachel, I've spent the last 2 weeks with you, and I have so many pages marked. I am today in the library at Piedmont College, where I taught world religions for 20 years, coming out of a church setting. I'm ordained in the Episcopal Church. And I did that for about 15 years and then sort of burned out on the job. So I got a wonderful teaching job here. But Rachel, you talk about being a baby. I mean, I am a baby compared to you because I was a Christian minister being asked to present the best of the world's traditions to undergraduates. And I had 4 days per world religion to do that. And I thought if anybody tried to do my faith in 4 days, I would just laugh. But it was such an honor and responsibility to be entrusted with that. We'll get into some stories about that later. But my experience of Islam was taking students on field trips to Atlanta, to different masjids there, which means we just dipped our toe in, and we were always the strangers and the outsiders. We never knew what to do or whether we were doing it right. And then your book was this full immersion. I mean, it's like I was in the wading pool and you were in the deep end, but it was so wonderful to meet your heart. I met your heart. And Abdi, I met your heart as well. And it was the heart that entrusts that God is greater, that God is always greater than our ideas of God, our prejudices about God, our homegrown cultural attachments about God. And your heart went beyond those to find and love your neighbor, which is deeply Christian and deeply human. As both of your books talk about the ways in which you discovered, as I discovered, that what we have most in common is not our religion, but our humanity. And our religions are made to make us more human and to make us more relatable and more in relationship with people like us, flesh and blood. So I loved both of your books. I almost need to go for a long walk tomorrow because I still feel like I am in the Horn of Africa. I can smell it. I have the dust on my feet. I have the wonderful tastes in my mouth. But Annie, thank you for hosting us and for bringing us all together on this screen. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, yeah, thank you. And so now I have a few questions for the three of you. There's sort of one question for each, but I would love, if at any point, someone else has something to add to that question, please jump in. We'd love to have some, conversation about these. But the first question is for Rachel. Can you describe how the change in your outlook brought about by your time in the Horn of Africa has affected your relationship to your original faith community?
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of layers to that original faith community. There are people like me who have decided to live internationally or engage across religious boundaries, and sometimes specifically with Muslims, sometimes with Christians, Buddhists, just any kind of faith tradition. And people like that have been, I think, tracking with me for a long time over the years. Those friends from years ago, as we've kind of processed our experiences together, I feel like we've had a lot of similar experiences, even though we've been in different locations in the world. So I find people like that are pretty open to this kind of perspective of finding goodness in the faith of others. But I would say that some people are really uncomfortable, to be honest about that. There are some people who are still in that sense of fear or feeling threatened, I think, by other religions. And so not everybody agrees with my perspective on how to live in this way. I get some pushback to my openness to reading the Quran or to engaging in practices like fasting for Ramadan or praying next to a friend, who's praying the Salat, which is the 5 times a day prayer that Muslims do. I use the word Allah every day when I'm speaking Somali. It's just part of our language. And I think that I know that some American Christians find that a hard word to hear. But to me, if I can say Dieu, if I can say Dios, if I can say Ebe, which is God in Somali, I can say Allah, which is Arabic for God. And so that's a little bit jarring sometimes for me, to be honest, to hear that some people think that word would maybe not apply to God as they understand God. So yeah, linguistically, I feel like it's just a word we use. And so, I feel like Christians are called to fast in the Bible and Muslims are called to fast. And so if we fast during the same month, that's okay. That's great. It doesn't have to be a negative thing or a divisive thing, but some people might find it that way. So, I think the way that I've decided to live in the world has led to good conversations with people, which is really why I wanted to put this book out, because I feel like we need to talk about this stuff. We need to be willing to dialogue about the things that make us uncomfortable. So it's okay with me that they might be uncomfortable with my decisions, but I want to talk about it. I don't want to just kind of shut down or have this be a barrier.
Yeah, I mean, the point about, just the actual living in a different language can change your whole perspective, obviously. And so for people who haven't experienced that, they might not be able to accept how that could change your life. Did either of you have anything to add, Barbara or Abdi, to that question?
To echo something Abdi said, wow, I taught 5 major world religions, and Islam was by far the most loaded. For most of the college students I taught, the US had been at war in some Middle Eastern country their entire lives. And, to let that sink in. I mean, one of the hugest surprises for a bunch of them was to find out that Allah in Arabic meant God. That, if they went to Palestine and worshiped in a Palestinian church, they would hear Palestinian Christians, call God Allah. All I would say is that it sounds like all of us are about turning the narrative so that the diamond catches a different facet, than the headlight that's usually put on it. Abdi, what about you? Now I'm talking too much.
Oh no, Barbara. Barbara. Well, nice to meet you, by the way. Thank you so much. Yeah. I think honestly, I remember in 2000, 2012 when I joined my brother in Kenya and we lived as refugees. Interestingly enough, we caught up with a group of students from Boston that said, hey, we just want to take you out for a day from the board life. So come hang out with us. We're gonna take you on a bus tour. But we went to a church in central Kenya. And my brother and I would hold hands and just look each side. Just we were worried because we've never stepped into a church in our whole lives. And growing up in Mogadishu, throughout the war, I mean, in the 80s and 70s, when there was peace, there was a diversity of religion in Somalia itself. And Rachel, you probably know this. There's a missionary in Hargeisa and all the backlash that's going on social media. So I think, anyways, what I was trying to say is predominantly people are peaceful and really want to live side by side with whoever they choose. Mm-hmm. But then there is the toxic, very small minority that are the loudest and the most powerful. Mm-hmm. And one good example is just Al-Shabaab in Somalia, which makes it look like every young man in Somalia now is Al-Shabaab, which actually is not even true. 99.9% of the young men are not interested in their ideologies, in the way they see things, so we're mostly, I think, secretly really enjoying other things like, what happens in the church, what other names does God have that Allah has that I would like to say. Rachel, you mentioned the word Abdi, which is interesting because we use that word a lot than Allah. So Abdi is the Somali word for Allah. Allah is the Arabic word. So yeah, with that experience in Kenya, and now I think about it, as I was reading your books, like, why was I terrified? Why has somebody or some sort of like, who created this sort of narrative that you really have to fear for your life if you walk into some building that some human being has built? Doesn't even matter what's happening there. It's just about this, particular building. So I think now what I'm trying to say here is telling these stories really helps, soften it up. I think Rachel has really created a love in the hearts of many Somalis who may have never met a Christian, may have never interacted with them. And you give them some sort of a sense of feeling now that they could say, it's all right. I'm not really worried about these people. They're really fine. We can, you fast with us. I would like to see what I could do in your traditions. Like, can I celebrate Christmas? What's Thanksgiving? How about Easter? Those kind of stuff. So.
And I would mention, Abdi, because you spoke about attending a Sufi masjid, I would tell you that I had an uncle who was a Catholic Christian, and he was taught never to enter a Protestant Christian church. And he told me he was terrified by the prospect of entering a Protestant church. So within our traditions, we have divisions, but those don't come out when we're focusing completely on, befriending the neighbor of another tradition. We have so many divisions in our own traditions that we could also work on.
Yeah.
And Abdi, you mentioned also, it made me think of that, I'm telling the story from my perspective of how my faith has been kind of opened up. But yes, I feel like Somalis too have been opened up to their experience of Christianity because of me. I have definitely experienced people saying, some people have said, yes, come pray with me. And some people have said, no. I don't think a Christian can pray with a Muslim. That's a Muslim saying it. Maybe they're uncomfortable with it. Or, there has been violence. There is violence in my story. Excuse me, from the very beginning of our time in Somaliland, the reason we ended up in Djibouti was because of violence. But it's not, it wasn't Muslim Christian violence, and it wasn't the whole story. I could decide to tell that story, like you said, in the journalist kind of outsider perspective, I could tell that story of violence or fear. I do tell a story in the book even about a woman. I go to the market. I'm waiting for the tailor to sew a dress for me, a Somali sheep. And while I'm waiting, this woman is selling tea next to us. And she looks at me and she just draws her finger across her throat. And she says, I could kill you. And I laugh. Okay, I laugh because I've kind of developed this morbid sense of humor now. But but I didn't interpret it at that moment as a threat. It was kind of like a test. Like, how are you going to respond to me in this moment? I'm a stranger and she's a little bit uncomfortable with me also. And so in that moment, how I decided to respond was she did that. And then she said, would you like some tea? And so I thought, oh, okay, I'll have some tea, let's drink tea together. Let's start there. And then we had a great conversation. And so I think what I'm trying to say is that it goes both ways, that need to open our mind, and even the prejudices and the fear. People think that I'm going to pay someone to change their religion if I spend time with them. And so there's pressure from their family about, why are you spending time with this foreign Christian person? And so it's just a lot of what I feel like I do here is to break down those barriers, both in my own heart, in my Christian community, and then on the Somali side too.
Awesome. So here's a question. I think for all of you, I would like to hear from all of you for this. So most of our listeners tonight are probably sympathetic to the message in Rachel's book and her viewpoint and experience regarding Islam. How might people discuss this topic with a friend or family member who doesn't share that view? What do you all think?
I think that in that conversation and many others I can think of, depends on the motive for the discussion. Because I am invited to discussions that are meant to scold or shame or convert me, and I'm not loving those, and they're not in the spirit of this book. But when I'm invited into discussions where someone wants to share a surprising discovery with me, and I have some level of trust with them and them with me, it's life-changing, it's transformational. So I think my motive, I have to be a person of goodwill. If I begin the discussion, I love to be invited. I love being asked a question instead of offering an answer that the question hasn't been asked. So that's my response, is to share with this book, with both books, over and over. I will share surprising discoveries, things we have in common across remarkable differences. So that's the way I will begin discussions, is with these two books. And I'll buy them and give them to people also. Since this is a book event, I'm going to order 12 of each and start giving them away, okay?
Right. I would like to jump in for a second. I think what Rachel has done or is doing is the way we really need to do it. And Rachel, you probably know this. The only thing that freaks a Somali is hearing a missionary spreading Christianity in Somalia, right? That terrifies everybody, the neighbors, and the nation as a whole. There are really terrifying stories circling around Somalia of missionaries trying to take over the country, introducing Christianity. So that's not the best way to do it. I have nothing against missionaries, but I think a friendship like Rachel is doing, hey, I'm a teacher, but I also have my own religious views, and this is what I have. Do you want to have a conversation? Can we talk about this? How about if we have tea together, coffee together? Even if you said this to me, right? Can I show you how patient I am, how resilient I can also be? I'm not, you're not like withdrawing and calling the government to say, oh, there's this woman who threatened me trying to kill me. You did not do that. Mm-hmm. So I think what happens to that woman, maybe 5 years from now, is that she says, well, I really feel regretful that, I just did that. From the moment, I really don't know how sarcastic she was, or, to me, it sounded like she was just trying to get your attention, in some ways. She knows she can't kill people, and that is very unusual. It doesn't mostly happen a civilian woman attacking and killing a foreigner. I've never heard of that story in Somalia. So, Barbara, I think I really agree with you. There is somebody that I'm really connected with, I became friends with, but there are things that I feel a little bit frustrated a lot. In her emails all the time, she says, let's pray together in the name of Jesus and things like that, right? I'm not a Christian, of course. I'm a Muslim by faith, but I really like to have a conversation that is not based on let's pray on your way or let's pray on my way. Let's pray on our way, right? I don't care what God you believe in. I take Jesus dearly in my heart. And that's just personally, I'm not going to take this to social media, but I don't also, I don't also feel exactly as connected as a Christian would be. But if someone asks you to pray their way, and that would be the where the answers would come from, it just makes someone really a little bit frustrated, or maybe I would say annoyed, right? So the best way to approach this is I don't ever ask somebody to raise their hands and pray to God or to Allah, right? I don't say that kind of thing to my foreign friends. What I say is, hey, why don't we pray for world peace in whatever terms or language that comes to you? To me, I memorized Arabic and the Quran, so that's the way I do it. I can say it out loud if that's okay with you, but I don't have to interpret it. And you can say it out loud. We can go to the church, or we can go to the mosque together. Or if you want, let's just hike, go up the mountains and do it that way. Because God is God. It, doesn't matter what name you give him, but he's the same guy. Or she's the same woman, I know Barbara is like, what are you talking about? Can you say that in Somalia? No, I can't. But I'm just trying to show you how open I am. I'm so tired of every prophet being a man, or every God being a man, stuff like that, when woman is the one who gives birth to us. So that's my just little Somali, little radical stuff. I guess. I know most of my friends don't agree with me on this, but
It's true. Annie, this is a convention of radical people here.
I love it.
Yeah.
We've all gotten in trouble for something, right? Religious, I think we have all.
I think we're killing each other mostly on religion, because there's a lot of false narratives that's just everywhere. We don't really even know. I mean, to me, I grew up Sufi, Barbara, like you said.
Oh.
And the Sufis are extremely peaceful. They like to dance. They like to eat together. They like to date, go out and, spending nights and nights together up around the cemetery area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the religion I understand. Everything else that comes after that is just, to me, unimaginable. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand Al-Shabaab's Wahhabism. It's something that I can't belong into.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I think if we think it creatively, things come up, right? I think a lot about why is God man? Why our mothers, are women? That can not be answered by anybody at the moment, I guess, because we have nothing Christian, Jewish, Islam, whatnot. But I think it's really, really good to question things. I think what kills humanity is they don't question stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think God, if he's a man, that he will hate me for saying this. It's just questioning. And if it turns out that it's not true, well, then let it be, right? But there are folks who would just say you can't question it because that's not okay. And I think, in my personal view, I would disagree with that.
Yeah, I think a life of faith has to start with asking questions, right? And even cross-culturally being curious about, what are you doing? Why are you doing it that way? And what does that mean for me? And what does God look like here? We have to be able to ask questions. And I absolutely think that asking those questions is, that's what grace is for, right? Like, we're human. We have no idea what God is actually like. I mean, we have ideas. I shouldn't say we have no idea. We have some idea. But we have not seen God, and so can we have a little mystery, and can we ask a lot of questions and be open to experiences? I think we have to.
There's a wonderful theme, I think, in the books that are on the table tonight, and it's replacing fear with curiosity. Think how often that has come up in what we've said. And Rachel, at one point you asked someone, what do you love most about being Muslim? Or what do you love most about Islam? And that was an assignment I gave college students, to interview someone of another faith and be sure, like, what is your favorite story from your faith? What do you love most about being, of your faith? And then what is the most common stereotype, the wrong impression people have of your faith? And that, I loved reading those papers more than anything I ever assigned. And it was all about replacing fear with curiosity and asking positive questions that would elicit people's love for their traditions.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite conversations. to hear those stories, and I could just see in my friend's body even how much surprise she felt that that's what I was going to ask her, and then her delight in telling the stories. It was beautiful.
Well, we're going to move on to audience questions now, and we have a few already. And if you're watching and have a question in your head that you haven't put in the YouTube chat yet, please do it now. So make sure that we see it here. But I'm going to start with a question from Ron. It actually seems of a theme with what we were all just talking about. For Rachel, was there a mutual desire to move the other to convert you to Islam, or maybe a desire to change their view of Jesus? I think this is sort of starting to speak to the curiosity angle.
Yeah, so I would often, even still now, when I'm walking, I hear people say Shahade, Shahade, which means say the Shahada. And the Shahada is the Islamic creed, like the statement of faith. There's no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. And so, yeah, people have definitely wanted me to say that. A lot of times it's just a kid on the street who's kind of giving me my attention, which, like Abdi said, maybe that woman was just trying to get my attention. And I've even had kids throw stones at me, which initially feels very aggressive. And sometimes, to be honest, it is aggressive, but often it's just trying to get my attention. And so, yeah, there's that urge. Or, I'll be at the gas station and the man pumping my gas will say, hey, are you a Muslim? You should become a Muslim, because they love their religion. They're satisfied in it. And so there is the sense that, hey, you should love what I love. Or, even more so in friendships, actually, people who do care about me and have a real relationship, they want me to love what they love. And I find that an honor, actually, when they want me to become a Muslim. And yes, I also love my religion. I love Jesus. I love being a Christian. And so I do want people to love what I love. I think that's part of a relationship. And if we're not being honest about that, I feel like we're not quite being transparent about what we do love. So I feel like when I'm so grounded in what I love about my faith, that allows me to receive someone else's kind of offer of entering their faith with an openness and a willingness to say, you know what, I respect that. I understand that you appreciate that, but I'm really satisfied with where I am. And I just feel like that's a real honest response, instead of just trying to shut it down, or to say, I don't really care if you know Jesus the way that I know Jesus. I don't think that's honest either. And so yeah, it's both ways. And I find that actually really honoring.
Great. We have one from Dudley. For all these authors, do the authors feel like their faiths have been cracked open to embrace something bigger? Take that and run with it.
Yeah, I hinted at it, but I remember when I was in a church and serving a church that someone got just so tired of going over the same things in sermons and Sunday school and said, I want my faith to help me transcend my faith. I want my faith to be bigger than, only my community. So part of the great gift of teaching world religions was to have my certainties about many, many things challenged, broken, dropped. I had to have a rummage sale of what I would keep and what would go. And I even ended up radically in my tradition saying, Jesus never told me to love my religion. He told me to love my neighbor. And so if it comes to a choice between my neighbor and my religion, I choose my neighbor. That's the teaching I have received. So yeah, the top of my head, the top of my certainty exploded. Thank God.
Yeah, definitely bigger faith. To see that God is here too. A lot of Christians have this idea, American Christians, that they're going to bring God someplace. Like a missionary who's going to Somalia. I'm bringing God here. And you know what? God's been here from the very beginning. God's been active and involved in people's lives. And so to see that my idea of what God looks like in Minnesota it's a good thing. It's a beautiful thing for Minnesota, for my community, but it needed to be bigger than that. It needed to include the global body of faith, of all kinds of faith. And it needed to recognize that God is active and present and a part of other places with or without me. That I'm not vital to God being God in the world. So a bigger faith, a bigger understanding of what it looks like, what I'm a part of even, that's, I think, been a big part of my expansiveness, of growing the sense that I'm a part of something outside myself, that's across borders and across specific practices, across, Catholic, Protestant, Baptist. I had definitely grown up in that same idea, Barbara, that you referenced earlier, of the divisions between, even within my Christian system. And so, God transcends those barriers.
When I read the Genesis and the Exodus, it's amazing, I think, as we learn more about the other religion, how more connected you are yourself and your faith to this other faith. And in other words, it all leads to one path. Now, if you're only one dominant faith, it more feels like sort of like scattered, and the other one is more distant. But then again, it all comes together as you really learn more, about the other faith. So I've purposefully taken Christianity classes, and believe it or not, it was one of the most exciting classes that I've really taken. It's not boring. Thank God, because I think I grew up in a dominant Muslim, so everything we talk about really makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of similarities when we talk about Moses, for example, and the pharaohs, those stories. Is like, wow, I learned this in Arabic and in Somali, and now it's really interesting to see it this way. So with that, as you grow, as you learn more, as you earn more knowledge and understanding of the other faith, the more you really fall in love with humanity itself, right? Barbara, you said your neighbors, right? Your neighbors don't necessarily have to be from the same type of sect or faith or whatnot that you believe in, but at the end of the day, it's more like, well, if you're a Christian and I'm a Muslim, the thing that's bigger than all of us is just God. We all are going one direction. I don't have any way why I don't have to associate with you. I feel like we're in the same in the same place. We're just divided a little bit by things that you believe particularly about Jesus, and things I believe about Muhammad, or some other ways. And then at the end of the day, it's just bigger. It's all like we're actually all one, created by the same God, and go in the same direction. So why not hold hands and lead together?
Another that makes me think a little bit, Abdi, about even how looking at Islam and Muslim faith has expanded my own idea of Bible stories. So one of the women that comes into the book is Hagar. And I've always read Hagar through the Christian tradition, which is actually Jewish, because she's in Genesis. But thinking about the role that she plays in Islam made me go back and look at her story more, and it expanded her story and who she was as a character in her naming of God and in the promise that God gave her for her son. And in that way, I feel like my faith expanded. And so also the Bible stories that I grew up reading here, they just came alive. So through that, like through Hagar, but also through, life here just looked a little bit more like probably it looked in Bible times than a Minneapolis massive city, And so in ways of seeing Bible stories come alive right before my eyes, I was literally in the market, and a woman, a beggar, a widow, she was very poor. I was helping her, and she had no money except for 2 coins to give for, it was supposed to be for her bus fare. And a beggar came up to us, and she gave her coins to this beggar. And I remember the story from the New Testament where Jesus said that, where the widow comes and she gives her 2 coins, and Jesus says she has given more than everybody else. And I thought, my goodness, this is my faith coming alive. And so in that way, I feel like my brain exploded to see these things actually happening in front of me and across time. And so that's been really, really powerful.
Well, I think we have time for one more question, actually one more question, and one very specific question just for Rachel. Rachel, do you have a Christian house of worship where you live now, or do you just do it on your own? That's from RS.
Yeah, now I do have a church that we attend. It's been a little bit different over the years. The work week here is Sunday through Thursday, and so Friday and Saturday is the weekend. And so church for a long time was on Sunday night, and it was in French, and it was at the end of a work day, and it was exhausting, and it was hard to go. So sometimes we would go when the kids were little, and sometimes we didn't. But now we've actually started an English language service that's on Friday morning. And so it's at a church building downtown. Djibouti allows for 2 government-approved public places of worship. There's a cathedral and there's a Protestant church. And so we attend the Protestant church. And it's a huge mix of people from all over the world. And I love it. Our pastor's from Senegal, our music director's from Congo, the parish council leader is from Madagascar. And so it's a real mix of even faith traditions that we bring into our Christianity. And yeah, we go there to worship.
That's wonderful. So final question, this one's from Holly. And then after this question, I think Rachel, you were going to do a brief reading from Pillars, so we'll get to that. So from Holly, do any of you see the global pandemic, fear, changes, losses of the past year helping to move us towards a deeper desire to understand how we all do this, how we all put our pants on one leg at a time, is how Holly has put it.
So yeah, let me jump in right here. I think, Annie, that's a really interesting question. I have had friends of mine very close, who would ask us to pray together throughout this. In some ways, we don't even know where we're going from here. This was before we even were thinking about vaccination. And I think especially there was no moment in history where mosques had to be closed. If you may remember, even in Somalia. And COVID has actually forced these places of worship, and worshiping, and particularly in Islam, usually means coming together and standing shoulder to shoulder in rows, praying together. On Fridays particularly, and in the Quran, it actually strongly says you have to attend Friday prayers. The only time you can't attend is if you're feeling sick or something's wrong. So I think so many people felt like this is the moment that God is testing our feeling of disconnection and things like that. But then again, how do you really save your community? Because if you're gathering together, it just becomes more difficult. So it's been quite of like rethinking of how we do things together. And I think the community that I belong to, for example, in Maine, has said, hey, it's winter, it's cold, we can't do anything, but let's Zoom together and pray together. So these new technologies have really brought even more people together, because one guy who's leading the prayer in Lewiston, Maine, could be connected to someone else in Minneapolis, and then maybe parts of Africa. So I think it's mostly really brought people together by faith.
I'll jump in so that Rachel has the last word. And images came to mind because the newspaper I read every morning throughout this year has had photographs from around the world, and Djibouti was there. And, there'd be pictures of people in Berlin, in Paris, in New Delhi, in Buenos Aires. And it was just remarkable to keep saying, this is global. This is global. All of us dressed in all these different ways, responding in our different ways. It was like we're all within this frame, of dealing with this unprecedented thing. So it was a visual for me every day of remembering how bound I was to people around the world.
Yeah, and here, I think one of the things that stuck out to me a lot was that when it first started, my Djiboutian friends said, so we were getting a lot of fear from the news. And my Djiboutian friend said, you know what, we're not afraid. We know how to take care of each other. And that sentence just really stuck with me when one of my friends told me that. And she described stories of how they've dealt with tuberculosis or HIV, not herself, but in their community, and how they really do take care of each other in ways that are intimate and very connected, not the ways that I'm used to in very individualistic, American, self-sufficient ways, And so for me, I feel like the pandemic has opened up new creativity, new ways to get involved with people and to take care of each other and to be taken care of also. Not just me always needing to take care of other people, but to be served by them too in our isolation or loneliness or sicknesses, whenever that would happen. So in those ways, I feel like it's helped just to highlight the beautiful ways that people here do take care of each other and are very actively involved in each other's lives.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. So on that note, Rachel, would you like to do a brief reading and then we'll take it out?
Sure. So I actually don't have a copy of the book yet because of Djibouti Post. And so I have a printout of the cover behind me, and I'm going to read from a Word document on my computer. And this is from the introduction. It's just a portion of the intro. It's not the whole thing. Excuse me. 10 months is longer than a pregnancy, longer than a school year. 10 months is longer than winter, spring, and summer combined. But 10 months is not long enough to change the world. 10 months is not even long enough for me to master a grammatically correct past tense Somali sentence. My family's 10 months in Somaliland ended with 3 bullets and a phone call. The first bullet came on October 5th, 2003. Annalena Tonelli, Italian, Catholic, the Mother Teresa of Somalia. She ran a hospital in Somaliland, now dead. The next 2 bullets came on October 20th. A British couple, Richard and Enid Iington, had worked at the SOS Sheikh Secondary School, dead and dead. My husband and I knew nothing about the Iingtons' murder when Tom drove to Ahmad University the next morning. I prepared food and kept our 3-year-old twins from falling into the water cistern. The kids picked limes, filled their pockets with marble-sized gobe fruits, and tormented the neighbors' goats that wandered into our yard to munch down the weeds. Our director, an American based in Hargeisa, Somaliland's capital, called around 11 a.m. This is how I remember the phone conversation, how I have replayed it over the years. Sit down, he said. Where's Tom? At school. Get him home, now. Richard and Enid Iington were murdered last night. He said, everyone is leaving, the UN, the Red Cross. You're on a flight to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. He said we had one-way tickets for a plane that left in 2 hours. It was a 2-hour drive to the airport. He said our work at Ahmad University was finished. No one knew who would be next, if there would be a next. I look back now on that woman in Somali clothes who had finally learned how to keep her headscarf from slipping, finally learned to make spaghetti without a jar of ragu, finally earned invitations to weddings and dinner parties. I look back and see myself go through motions, barely comprehending what was happening. I move to the bedroom and grab clothes, not thinking, not folding. In the kids' room, I scoop up toys and books and the special blankies they'd had since birth. I brush my fingertips over objects that must remain. The dollhouse that Tom had built from flimsy plywood. The bookshelf with 3 novels, a Bible, a Quran, and language books waiting to be filled with new vocabulary. I need to keep packing, but even more, I need Tom to come home. I tell the twins to find their favorite toys and put them in a shared backpack. My voice is calm, my fingers tremble. I am afraid. I don't acknowledge it. I won't for years. I lose track of how many times I try to call Tom. Cell phone coverage is spotty at Ahmad. Would someone else tell him to run? Was he safe? What if he doesn't come? What if our guard's gun isn't for protection, but for aggression? What happens to faith when fear takes over? I didn't stop to pray, but let it beat with my heart and my breath. Come home, come home, come home. I shifted the contents of my bag: diapers, water bottle, can of tuna, cash, identification documents. What would we need? How long would we be in Ethiopia? 1 bag, 1 backpack. We might never return. What could I leave behind? I needed to move more quickly. I heard the front door crank open and a Toyota Surf entered our compound. Alhamdulillah, praise God. Tom was home, alive and with me. I ran outside and Tom jumped from the vehicle. Get the kids into the car, he said. He said he would turn off the water pump and lock the generator. Henry and Maggie had their bag ready, the fuzzy white head of a stuffed bunny sticking out the top. I walked them through the house and told them to say goodbye. Goodbye, mosquito nets. Goodbye, lime tree. Goodbye, chickens. They thought it was a game and laughed. Outside, I paused on the front stoop and scanned the yard. Damp clothing hung from the line. Habon, our housekeeper, had left right after the phone call. She'd understood the danger and hadn't even said goodbye. Goodall, our guard, stood beside the car. Goodall, who had taught me how to shoo goats from the yard with the bristly end of a stick broom, who had played tag with the kids and made sure they didn't touch his AK-47 rifle. I loaded our bag into the car and turned to him. I had never touched a man in Somaliland other than Tom. I didn't even speak to men besides our guard or look them in the eye. Nabadgilyo, Goodall, I said. Go in peace. Nabadgilyo, he replied. I wanted to pull his bony body into my arms and tell him thank you. Thank you for the vocabulary words. Thank you for protecting us. Thank you for being my first friend in Somaliland. I thrust out my right hand and half smiled. He gripped my fingers and put his left palm over his heart. I never saw him again. As we drove off, I said goodbye to every house we passed. It hadn't been an easy place, but it had been our first home in Africa, and this wasn't the way I wanted to leave. Forced out, afraid, a trail of blood behind us. I left behind our first international home and all the idealism poured into it, both by us and by a welcoming Somali community. I left behind the lie that nothing bad or dangerous would happen to my family, that we were protected by a magical spiritual force because we had taken the risk of moving to this country. I left behind the chimera that home equaled refuge. Before leaving the United States 10 months earlier, I had flippantly remarked that the safest place for a Christian was in the center of God's will, how it was better to move across the planet to a potentially hostile location than to spend 3 days in the belly of a whale. I hid behind cliches and stories and left no room to grapple with visceral fear. Later, I would understand God's will as an inherently unsafe place to be. It hadn't been safe for Jesus. It led him straight to torture and death. God never promised safety, no matter how much I craved it. But what did safe mean? Safety is a Western illusion. So here I was, unsafe and scared, wrestling with what that meant about my faith. Along with the commandments to not be afraid come the words of the psalmist. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. What is faith for, if not to cling to when storms rage and fear swallows me whole? I couldn't face this yet. I wasn't ready to look at the phrase, when I am afraid. Fear still felt like weakness. That night in a cramped Ethiopian guest house, I felt pinned to the lumpy mattress by overwhelming emotion. Grief for the victims in the nation, anger that a minority within Islam would yet again define Muslims, disappointment that we'd been in Somaliland so briefly, and fear that the people I trusted might not be who I thought they were. The next day, my daughter Maggie wanted to talk. When are we going home, she asked. We aren't, I said. We aren't going home? I shook my head and glanced away so she wouldn't see my tears. Maggie sighed. When can I go play at Decca's house? Decca was my friend Basha's daughter. The kids had played together and attended school together. I sank to the floor and rested my forehead on my arms. I don't think you'll ever see Decca again, I said. That makes me sad, Maggie said. I want to go home. Me too, I said, surprised at how quickly we had all attached to Somaliland. Living a life of faith in the Horn of Africa was turning out to be a lot more complicated than I'd anticipated. I was not excited about the direction this journey was taking my family. I had come with specific ideas about what life in Africa would look like, about home and family, and especially about faith. But what good is home if it can't be rebuilt again and again? What good is faith if it can't be transplanted, and in the transplanting, be transformed? After a few days in Ethiopia, we went to Nairobi, Kenya, where we received trauma counseling, took Somali language courses, and sought direction for the next step. 3 months later, in January 2004, we landed in Djibouti, our fourth country in the Horn. This is the story of how, living in the Somali Muslim world, an American Christian questioned her religion and found faith. I'll be as honest as I can. I'm still on the way. I hope you are too.
Thank you, Rachel. That was wonderful. And for those of you watching, I am sure you want to hear more. If you haven't got the book already, it's available at magersandquinn.com. There's a link in the chat, or you can just go straight to www.magersandquinn.com and search by title or author. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you for being here with us. Yes, you can also get Call Me American by Abdi. We have that as well. And Barbara, Abdi, Rachel, thank you so much. Thanks to Plow Publishing. They're a wonderful partner in this event, and just hope we see you at another event sometime soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks, Annie.
Thank you.